of this House do now adjourn.
The honourable member for Windsor West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise again about the Canadian auto industry. I specifically asked about the case of General Motors. Mr. Speaker, we have seen a reduction in investment in the auto industry, unprecedented in Canadian history, given the fact that there has been massive investments not only in Mexico but also the United States. And General Motors is one of those cases where Oshawa, for example, Mr. Speaker, has been requiring another product, but unfortunately the divestment of there has taken place at the expense of the workers. Now, there are active engagements and talks going on with the union and the company right now, but the lack of a federal auto policy has seen us shrink for our investment percentage quite significantly. Despite what the government may say about what they've invested in, it is far much smaller than is taking place in our actually auto environment. And what's concerning, Mr. Speaker, is the USMCA agreement that has been agreed in principle, this new NAFTA agreement, still likely won't get implemented because of several problems, also has further auto concessions, and that's another issue. But, Mr. Speaker, what's happening right now is, unlike what the Prime Minister has said, is that we have to transition out of manufacturing. He famously said that in London, Ontario, is there's actually record investment taking place even within a matter of miles of Windsor, 2 miles across the border, where $14 billion alone by Fiat Chrysler and General Motors is being invested in Detroit, Michigan. And, Mr. Speaker, today is the first day of a new incentive program that the government has rolled out for auto with regards to electric and other types of greener vehicles. And ironically, Mr. Speaker, this government originally proposed a $300 million incentive program that actually restricted and eliminated the only electric-made vehicle in Canada, being the Windsor-built Chrysler Pacifica. Ironically, Mr. Speaker, that they had to be brought to the table to actually include this multi-passenger vehicle that's an electric motor, because the government excluded it. And that's after the Prime Minister visited the plant in Windsor. So he visits the plant in Windsor, promises he's going to come back many times, promises he's going to support the workers, and what does he do? He leaves them off the incentive program. Thank goodness, Mr. Speaker, that auto workers across Ontario, including close to not only just the Windsor area, but along the 401 up all the way to Toronto, into the Brampton area, the Brampton Assembly area, where we've signed up a number of different workers to get the actual Pacifica included in the incentive program. Now, there's several problems with that program, Mr. Speaker, because we're talking about $300 million that is going to primarily, likely, going to be for foreign vehicles. And we do have the Chrysler Pacifica on that, but the foreign vehicle incentive program the government's laid out, unfortunately, should have actually gone to creating a cleaner, greener industry with manufacturing in Canada. And we haven't had a national auto strategy, and what's interesting is the Fiat Chrysler and the General Motors investments of billions of dollars in Detroit is for the advanced technology vehicles that we could have had here. So on my question with regards to General Motors in Oshawa and the closing there, the government simply did not even follow through with their own auto czar, Ray Tanguay, for 2 years ago, tabled a report to this government. And ironically, it was in Detroit where the minister actually received the report from Ray Tanguay. Not even in Canada. He received the report that he paid for and did nothing with it over the next year and a half, as we witnessed plant closings and we witnessed plant openings and a number of investments taking place not only in Mexico but also in the United States. Mr. Speaker, it's wrong. We have to reverse it. We can still do it.
L'honorable secrétaire.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to respond to the observations that were made by the member for Windsor West concerning the automotive industry, and particularly in Oshawa. We've said several times that General Motors made a mistake in announcing the closure of the Oshawa plant. The minister shared this perspective, shared his perspective with Ms. Barra from GM in a meeting in Detroit. We want the Oshawa workers and all Canadians to know that we are committed to supporting the growth and diversification of the Canadian economy. We remain determined to maintain the innovation and competitiveness of the Canadian auto industry.
In the heart of North America's largest vehicle producing region, known as the Great Lakes Automotive Manufacturing Cluster. Canada's automotive sector is highly integrated with the North American framework, with the free trade between Canada and the U.S. dating back to 1965, and trilateral trade, including Mexico, growing since the introduction of the North America Free Trade Agreement. It's a significant driver for our economy and remains one of Canada's largest manufacturing sectors. Some of you may not be aware, but despite producing less than 1/5 of all vehicles in North America, Canada's assembly plants have won 1/3 of all GD Power Quality Award in North America over the last 30 years. And contrary to what the honourable member thinks, we do have a strategy for the automotive sector. Parmi les mesures prises,
our government has taken a number of steps. For example, the creation of the Strategic Innovation Fund, a $2 billion fund to attract large-scale investments. We also created the Invest in Canada agency and launched the World Skill Program to improve the automotive sector in Canada. These changes allowed us to obtain investments of over $6 billion in the auto sector since 2015. And once again, I will say that these changes have allowed us to gain investments of over $6 billion since 2015. I'll say it again. So these tangible results are the result of this plan. And Monday's announcement by Toyota concerning the new Lexus hybrid in the Cambridge plant are an example of that.
uniquely positioned to design and build the cars of today and tomorrow. Canada is a natural home for automotive innovation with strength to leverage, including a mature automotive cluster, expertise in advanced technologies, and highly skilled workforce and a strong R&D capacity. Canada's competitive advantage, along with the future of the global automotive industry and the automotive sector, is well positioned to compete for innovation, investment in R&D, and vehicle production. And as I said, contrary to what the honourable member may think, Mr. Speaker, our government does have a plan for our country's automotive industry, and it works, and we remain committed to it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Windsor West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's not a question of what I think, it's what the facts are, Mr. Speaker. And the reality is Detroit, Michigan has actually got more investment than all of Canada in the auto industry. The parliamentary secretary can't even come to the realization that one single city in the United States has outperformed all of Canada. And you know, Mr. Speaker, the reality is that we haven't in our area just been producing autos since the 1960s. It's been 1904 where we had the first Ford plant, and subsequently had the sit-down strike to protect auto workers. And Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you this, we've come with propositions to this government. Yes. Since that time, there's been a layoff at the Windsor assembly plant. Yes. Instead of what this government has done, they have not answered a letter from me from February 27th and just 2019, where I called upon this government to work with all the suppliers, the union, the workers, and also the companies to get that investment from Detroit and get the access to the parts, the supplies, the tool and die, the mold makers, all those things. Yes. They can't even answer that question. Everybody wants to work on it but them. They're giving up opportunities. This innovation is being left at the table.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Earlier, our government has committed to building on Canada's strength, promoting innovation, investment, growth, and trade by the automotive industry to create quality jobs for Canadians. Our government has worked hard to maintain free trade in our market we currently do business in and open up new markets to help diversify our trade strategy. At the same time, our investment in innovation through Innovation and Skills Plan have helped bolster Canada's robust automotive cluster by supporting reinvestment in Canadian vehicle assembly plant by global automakers. These initiatives are helping ensure that Canada's workforce will have the advantage manufacturing skills that employers will need in the future's economy. And as I said earlier, our plan works. $6 billion worth of investment in the industry over the last 4 years. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.